Hello everyone and welcome to Greatest Access Tutorial Ever. I'm your host Jeremy. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we are looking at learning some VBA. This is lesson 7.2, which 7 means it's in the VBA series. And we're talking about learning about strings, subs, functions. We're also going over ByVal and ByRef. Don't worry, this is beginner. I know that sounds like a lot, but this is where things start to get awesome. So again, welcome to a Greatest Access Tutorial Ever. If you find this channel useful, please subscribe. If you think you're interested in doing that. If you like this video in particular, please give it a like. And if you want to know when new videos are out, please notify. Okay then. Some of you may ask, well, why are we using VBA instead of macros? Why don't we just do macros for some of the stuff? Well, because VBA is super powerful, flexible, and trains you to think. Macros are quick, and that's about it. They train you to drool. Now, I'm just kind of joking there. Everyone, when they first start, basically uses macros. Macros have their place, but I will not be teaching macros ever on this channel because once you learn VBA, they are just so much more powerful. The functions and stuff you can do in VBA is way more powerful than macros. So macros are really good for very basic stuff, but even on the basic stuff, I use VBA. So let's get started. We're going to go over procedures. Now, there are two basic types of procedures. There are subs and there are functions. Now, I'm going to go through a pictorial that explains this, and then we'll go through some code to show you how these work. What is a sub? Imagine you are here and you're running some code and you decide, hey, I want a robot, which is a sub, to do something for me. Now you may decide you have these presents over here, which are basically variables or objects. You say you may pass a present to the sub or you may not. And you say, hey, go do something. I may have given you something and I may have not. And the robot goes and does something. That is what's called a sub. This is what's called passing objects or passing variables to the sub. Now, again, that is what a sub does. You're doing something and you tell the sub, go accomplish some work. What is a function? A function is a little bit different. Same thing, you may have something to pass, you may not. You may pass it to a function and you may not. And you use parentheses. Now, the big difference is that when that robot goes to do the work, he always brings you back something. He brings you back something else in addition to what you had before. That is a function. Now, we're going to see that in Access. So this is a blank database. We're going to go to Database Tools, Visual Basic. Then we're going to click this little icon up here. This little icon up here, and you want to do module. You do not want to do class module. You want to start a new module. We're going to go ahead and hit Control-S for save, and we're just going to keep the default name module 1. And now we have a module sitting here. Now this is completely blank. And if you watched episode 7.1, you will realize that you need to set up your editor to require the declaration of variables. That's what this option explicit means. If you don't see that option explicit, you do not have that option enabled. So now, how do you do a sub or a function? Well, let's go public sub. That's what you start with, or you start with public function. But let's start with a sub first. Public sub my sub 1. Now, press enter. You'll notice now you have a divider line. It puts some parentheses here. If they're blank, that's okay. And you're just sitting here with absolutely nothing. Now, what can we do here? Well, the first thing we want to do, if we want to mess with some variables, is declare those variables. And the way you declare those variables or tell VBA, hey, I need a variable, is you say the keyword dim, give it a variable name, well, let's say x, and then we're going to declare what kind of variable it is. So dim x as string. And you know what? I'm going to make this font a little bit larger. Stand by, please. Sure. Just so you guys can see a little bit better. So now we have this public sub called MySub1. Now public means any part of the database can use this sub, and that's what you want for our purposes. And we have this variable. It's just a plain old x. It is called a string. Now a string is basically text. For instance, a normal sentence, a word, a letter, or something that you don't plan on doing math for. So 318, 333, 3. Something like that. That is also a string, even though it looks like a string of, it basically is a line of numbers. You have dashes in there. You don't plan on doing math on this. Maybe this is some special ID, etc., a part number, a model number. Even if it has numbers, you want to treat that as a string typically. So X is now a string. And let's go ahead and set aside 2 strings, Y as string. So now we have the variables X and Y, they are both string. Now, what can we do with these variables? Well, we can do some cool stuff. We can say X equals gate. Now, there is no double equal like in some languages, comparison operators and setting operators. SQL and VBA only use the single equal all the time. So it kind of makes it easy. We're going to do X equals gate, and then we're going to do Y equals is awesome. Now then, here's one of the first tricks you're going to learn, and this is why we set up the immediate window. Again, that is in episode 7.1. We're going to do this special command called debug.print X. Actually, let's put it in string X is, and then we're going to refer to the variable. Now, this is what's called a concatenating, or it's basically how you piece strings together. So we're going to do this. We're going to type this out twice. Debug print Y is space Y. And you'll notice this is white font or whatever color you've set up for your normal stuff, and this means, oh, that's a special identifier variable. Now we're going to hit save. Always debug your program, compile. You may have it to auto-compile, that's fine. If it's grayed out, don't worry about it, it's already been done. Now we're going to come down to our immediate window and we're going to type the name of this sub. My sub 1. Oh, not my stub, my sub 1. There we go. And the immediate window shows the results. My sub 1, X is gate, Y is awesome. Okay, yep, makes sense. So now, big deal, right? Okay, well, let's do something else. What if we give ourselves one more string? And I'm going to call it S for string, message as string. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to delete this part. So Y is still gate. I'm sorry, X is still gate, Y is still awesome. And I'm going to say X message equals X and Y. Now, again, this is a concatenating symbol in strings. It means we're going to put those 2 strings together. What do you think is going to happen if I do debug.print sMessage? What do you think is going to happen? So let's come down here. We're going to run my sub again. Gate is awesome. Now notice we don't have a space here. So how do we fix that? Well, we could put a space here. We could put a space here for Y. Or we could just put a space manually as we're defining what sMessage variable is. So sMessage equals X and quote, space, quote, and Y. Now, when I run my sub 1, gate is awesome. Pretty nifty, huh? Now, we're just getting started. This is a beginner class. There's much more involved. But before we get into subs and functions, well, this is already a sub. So congratulations, you've written your first sub. Now, you may think, well, this isn't very useful. This is just putting stuff in the immediate window. What's the use of that? Well, not much for an end user. It is very useful as a developer, as you're coding, right, to keep a track on things. You can put a debug message anywhere in your code just to see what the value is of something at any given time. Now, here's something that might be useful to the end user. So let's get rid of debug. Actually, we're not going to get rid of it. We're going to comment it, which is a single quote. Now, here's the sMessage. What can we do with this sMessage? Well, I'm going to bring this line up a little bit so we can see the end. We're going to do a special command called Msgbox. Now, you'll notice when you type the word Msgbox, you get this kind of helper text down here. I know it's really small on your screen. It's actually small on my screen. But it says Msgbox prompts, blah, blah, blah. It gives you a bunch of gobbledygook. So what can we do with Msgbox? We can say Msgbox is expecting a string value. We're going to give Msgbox the string value of our variable. Oh, sorry, so MSG. Now you hit comma and you get these options. Now these are your button options that appear on your message box. So let's do VB OK only, hit comma, and now we have this little helper text that says title. It's in brackets, which means it's optional. Let's do that. Now I'm going to compile just to make sure I'm okay. Now what's going to go down? Well, let's run my sub again. Now we have a pop-up. It's going to switch over to your active like database. This is something the user would see. Gate is awesome. This is my first message box. They get a prompt showing them a message box with whatever you've compiled as your variable. Now you don't have to do a variable. You can say, you can explicitly put this is a message, and then when we run it, this is a message. However, often when you're talking about very complex databases or even simple databases, a lot of times you need to piece together multiple things that are variables. You don't know what the message is going to be at the time, so you have to make it a variable, and then you're going to show that variable to the user. And you can do that through a message box, pop-up windows. This is a simple thing using a message box. Pretty nifty. Okay. Before we continue on, let's tighten up this code a little bit. So first of all, you see here we have dim x, dim y, dim message, s message as string. They're all strings. And if we had a bunch of variables, they would keep going down like this. Now that gets really cumbersome. So how do we clean this up? Well, there's actually two ways we can do it right now. One is, instead of doing that, I'm going to comment this entire thing out. I'm going to do dim x as string, hit a comma, y as string, hit a comma, s message as string. There. In one line, I've declared 3 variables. Now, the best practice is when you're declaring these variables, keep the same type on a line if you want to. And I always declare my variables up front at the very beginning of a sub. Some people like to do it as they need it. I don't like that because it's hard to track them down. Now, this is slightly more advanced, but still, I guess, beginner. There is a shortcut for certain types of variables where you don't even have to do as string. So instead of doing that, you can do this. Dim x $, y $, s message $. Now, do not get confused this with money. So when this character appears after a variable, it's telling VBA that is a string. And as you can see, it's much shorter than this. So if I had 10 different string variables, instead of typing as string, as string, as string over and over again, I can just do $. And when I refer to that variable, I don't need the $. This is just when I declare the variable. So if we run this, it's going to work exactly the same. We'll run it. Yep, this is a message. Pretty neat, huh? Now, because this also takes a string, we don't have to explicitly type that. We can say, here's my message, and I want a variable header. So first I need a variable called sHeader, and it's the thing. sHeader equals, wrap it in quotes, and then this message box, we're going to get rid of this, and we're going to pass it as header. So now message box reads message box. All right, we're doing a special command. We pass it the variable sMessage, which is x plus a space plus a y. We say, I want these buttons VB OK only. That's what options are available on the pop-up box. And then we pass it as header. Now, what do you think what happens? Gate is awesome. This is a header string. And that's very simple. Now, your message box can get quite complex. So, for instance, let's do this. Let's say sMessage equals that. And in variables, in most programming languages, you can set a variable to itself plus itself. So what do I mean by that? So I'm going to do sMessage equals sMessage. I'm going to give it an and sign, and I'm going to do a special command called VB character return. And I'm going to do that twice. Now, I know this looks kind of weird. Don't think of it as math exactly. So smessage currently is this. And if you want, you can put a comment to the side. X space, I'm sorry, it's X and Y, which is gate is awesome with a space. So that's what the value of smessage is at this particular time. It is gate is awesome. So we said smessage is X, which is gate, and a space, and is awesome, which is another string. And then we said, okay, smessage equals that and VB character return. That's what that means, or carriage return. We do that twice, and we append another smessage. So what do you think this pop-up window is going to look like? So let me tighten up my code here so we can see everything going on. What do you think this message box is going to look like? Well, let's run it and see. Gate is awesome, space, gate is awesome. So we had gate is awesome, smessage, character return, another character return to get that space in between, and then that variable. Pretty simple, right? All right, now, what is the difference between this and a function, and how do you pass variables? Okay, so let's get rid of this. We're going to destroy all of this, and we're going to say public sub, or my sub1, dim x, and we're going to give it a string. All right, and we're going to say x equals passed variable. Actually, let's do this. X equals gate. Now, we're going to do another public sub, my sub2. Now, in parentheses, because we're going to give it something, we have to tell it what we're giving it. So I'm going to say, I like to use the prefix P for past, but you can use whatever you want. Now, notice what I've done. I could have said P string as string. I could have not put anything, but it would be a variant, which means you don't exactly know what kind of variable it is. But since I know I'm going to pass this a string, I could put as string, or again, to shorten it up, I'm going to use the $sign for string. Just think of it as a big S. So public sub, my sub2. Now, what if I do this? Message box. P string, VB OK only. Now, if you don't get the helper text, you can back up and try again. VB OK only. This was passed. Now what do you think is going to happen? Well, nothing yet, because I have to call it. So I can call it two different ways. I can, in the immediate window, I can activate this. I can say my sub2. Now if I just try that and I hit enter, it's going to say this, argument not optional. This is an argument, so it's being passed an argument, which means you need to give it something. You need to give the robot a gift before it will do anything. So I will do my sub, and then hit go. This was passed, this was passed. Pretty neat. Now, I can also call this sub, as long as it's public, from another sub. So how would I do that? Back in my sub1, I have said x equals gate. I'm now going to call my sub2, and I'm going to pass it x. So what happens is we're running, x is a string, x equals gate. I then say, okay, now that I have established the variable x, I'm going to call my sub2. I'm going to pass it x right here. And then Msgbox does this. So now let's run my sub1. Gate. This was passed. So that's exactly what happened. We established a variable x. We called another sub from within this sub, and we passed it that x. And we're referring to x in this sub as p string. So we could have easily just called it x, but that would be confusing if you're looking at, I like to name them different things, because let's say you're reviewing this code and you've got x flying around, and then you're reviewing this sub and you've got x flying around. You may assume they're the same x, and they may not be. You always want to do, at least for me, I like to distinguish what I'm passing. So maybe you could just do px. So we have passed px, and now we need to refer to it, Msgbox px. This was passed, right? Too easy. Now, what is the difference between a sub and a function. Remember, the function always gives you a gift back, always gives you something back. So let's change up, let's get rid of my sub2, and we're going to do a public function. Public function change x. Now, let's say we don't pass it anything. And we're going to dim y as a string, and we're going to set y as the function, as a string called this is the function value. Now, back up in sub1, we have x and we have x equals gate. What happens? This is what you can do with a function. You can say x equals change x. Oh, there's one thing I forgot. With a function, you have to define what it is, what's being returned. So you could say public function change x as string, or again, you can say public function change x. Now, we eventually have to also set what it's returning to the value. So change x equals y. I know this is kind of weird. Trust me, just follow along. Okay, so let's review. My sub1, we have x as a string. X equals gate. Now, we have this function over here called change x. And I have just this other variable. I could have also named this x. Those x's don't interfere with one another, but I'm going to name it y just to keep it simple. We have y as a string, and I say y equals this is the function value. And then I set this function, change x, equal to that string. Now, up here, we say x equals change x. So what do you think x will be when I debug debug.print x? What do you think x will be? Well, let's try it out. So x was gate, but then x was set to the value of change x. And remember, because it's a function, the function always returns you a value back. So now you have this new value. I've set what I had before equal to whatever it's returning back. And there we have it. Too easy so far, right? Let's get a little more complicated. Now, I normally would kind of wait to save this, but this is something you must understand. There are two different ways to pass those arguments or those variables between subs. One is called ByVal. Now, this you can essentially think of as a copy of the actual item. So let's say you're running some code and you've got this variable here, and you tell the robot, hey, the sub or the function, hey, go run something. I'm going to ByVal pass you this. That's like a copy of that present. So later on, if that robot is doing something in that sub or that function and it changes that, you still have your original. You don't really care, or maybe you do care, but you still have that original variable sitting over here. Nothing's changed. Now, ByRef is very dangerous, or can be very sneaky. ByRef is the past items are the actual items. You can think of it, not technically, but you can think of it like that. And this is VBA's default. So what does that mean? Okay, I pass a variable, ByRef, which is default. The robot does something, well, it then changes, even if it's not returning something like a function, even if this is a sub, it does some work, but then that variable, since it's ByRef, has changed. Well, now I don't have my original blue variable anymore. It has now turned red, and we'll see that. So if this is confusing, don't worry. Practice, practice, practice. So let's do my sub. We're going to x equals gate, and we're going to say debug.print. This is the value of x. We ampersand, and then the variable x. Now, public sub change x. We're going to keep it. Oh, yeah, we can't. There we go. Public sub change x. Now, we are going to pass it x. And we're just going to do px equals okay. what do you think is going to happen when I do this? So now we have a sub, not a function, that is passed a variable, but by default, VBA does ByRef, which a lot of people hate this. I hate this also. So ByRef, I'm not giving the robot a copy of my variable. It's getting the actual variable. So what's going to happen after that robot's done? Well, he's going to change my variable. So x equals gate, debug.print, this is the value of x. Then I call change x and I pass it. Now, if it's a function, you have to use parentheses. If it's not a function, you don't use parentheses. You will get caught up on this a lot. If you're a beginner coder, that's okay. So let's do this, change x, x. Then we're going to do the same exact debug line again. What do you think is going to happen? Well, let's run it. So we started my sub 1. We have a variable x as a string, x equals gate. So I debug.print, this is the value of x, and it came out as gate. Then I called change x and I passed it x, and by default it's ByRef. So I didn't have to do anything special. I just passed it the value of x. It received this passed variable, but it's really the original. And I said px equals is awesome. So now when I do debug.print, we have changed x, which is up here in this sub. So how do we avoid that? Well, we put ByVal in front of it. Oh, no space. So I need to correct my slides. So no space. ByVal px. So now, what do you think is going to happen if I run my sub again? X was not changed. X remained gate. X equals gate. Debug.print. This is value of x, gate. I ran this, but it didn't do anything because I gave it a copy of x, basically. And it just said, okay, well, that copy is awesome, but I didn't do anything with that. And then when I call debug.print again from the sub, well, x hasn't changed because this was a ByVal pass. And there we have it. Pretty simple. Same thing with functions. Same thing with subs. ByVal and ByRef work the same between them. Now, I know it may seem kind of confusing because functions actually give you something else. And it seems like a ByRef passing, when it's changing it, is giving you something, but not really. Another way to think of it is if I do x equals, and then I can't do a sub. I can't say x equals change x. I can't do that because change x is not a function now. It's a sub. But if I did another public function, return 100, and I just say return 100 equals 100. And remember, as a function, we have to do as string, public function, return 100 as string. I'm not passing it anything. It's just going to give me something when I run it. So now I can do this. Notice x equals return 100. Now, what do you think is going to happen? So let's run through the code. My sub, we have x equals gate. Default value should be x. I'm sorry, gate. Change x. We run this, but it's a ByVal, not ByRef pass. So this really doesn't do anything. Then I have a function called return 100 as string. I set x equal to whatever that function returns me. And then I'm going to print that out. And so we should have gate, and then 100. And that's it. Gate, 100. There you have it, folks. That is it for today's lesson. If you like this video, please give it a like. Consider subscribing. If you have any questions, we are just getting started on strings. There are many more variables and many more tricks up VBA sleeve. Again, this is very introductory. I'm already at 29 minutes already. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much. God bless. Have a great day.